Unlock the door to mystery with one very short story. The micro podcast filled with morally complex characters, twists you won't predict, and endings you won't forget. Every episode is a brief, intense journey, perfect for listeners who crave mystery, intrigue, and stories that leave you thinking long after the tale ends. Today's episode begins now. Before we dive in, a nod to the ones who show up every week. Whether you're hate listening, hooked, or just here for the chaos, you know who you are. Your messages? I read them all. The praise, the rants, the stories you probably shouldn't have told a stranger with a mic. Keep them coming. If you're just tuning in, find me at jlstroudjr.com. Links in the description. Say something, or don't. Just know, the ones who speak up, they shape this thing more than they know. Now, this week's tale, the loyalty test, pulled from a late-night email by a subscriber who may or may not be telling the truth. Real or fiction, I'll let you decide. Names have been changed naturally, some to protect the innocent, others because they don't deserve to be remembered. Let's begin. Let me start with a warning to all you ambitious young men climbing the corporate ladder. That promotion to vice president you've been working toward? That partnership you can almost taste? There's one final test you might face that they don't teach you about in business school. I'm writing this from an anonymous account for obvious reasons. Let's just say I'm a senior director at one of the Fortune 500 companies you'd recognize instantly. 6 months ago, I was exactly where many of you are now, on the verge of breaking through to the executive suite after years of grinding, networking, and playing the game. I had the numbers, the connections, the pedigree. The corner office was practically mine. Then I met Emily. Before I get into that, let me be clear about something. This isn't just my story. As I've discovered, this is happening across industries, across the country. That's why I'm sharing this, not for sympathy or absolution, but as a warning. There's a glass ceiling for men too, and it's enforced in ways you'd never expect. Here's how it works. When you get close to joining the ranks of the true power players, when you're about to get a seat at the table where the real decisions are made, you become a threat. The old guard, the men who've been running things for decades, they need to know you can be trusted, that you're one of them, and they've developed a particular method of testing that loyalty. They use their wives. I know how that sounds. I wouldn't have believed it either. But I've done my research now, traced the pattern across companies and industries. It's real, and if you're not prepared, it could end your career just when you think you've made it. So listen carefully to my story. Learn from my mistakes. Because if you're good at what you do, if you're a real threat to the status quo, this test might be coming for you too. It started, as these things often do, at a company party. One of those mandatory fun events where everyone drinks just enough to seem social, but not enough to say what they really think. My boss, Richard, was there with his wife. I'd met her a few times before at similar functions. Always briefly, always with him hovering nearby. Richard is everything wrong with corporate America distilled into one Brooks Brothers suit. He takes credit for his team's work, delegates everything but the glory, and treats everyone below the VP level like they're disposable. I'd been putting up with his crap for years, biding my time, knowing I was next in line for promotion. That night, Richard was doing what he always does, cornering the CEO, laughing too loudly at unfunny jokes, name-dropping clients. His wife, Emily, was left to fend for herself at the bar. So I did what seemed like the polite thing. I struck up a conversation. Emily wasn't what I expected. Unlike the trophy wives most of the executives paraded around, she was sharp, witty, with a biting take on corporate culture that made me wonder how she ended up with someone like Richard. We talked for over an hour, mostly making fun of the performative networking happening around us. When Richard finally remembered her existence, she slipped me her number under the guise of connecting about a charity event she was organizing. I should have seen the red flags right there. Why would an executive's wife give her number to one of his direct reports? But I was flattered, maybe even a little smug. Here was this intelligent, attractive woman, clearly bored in her marriage to my insufferable boss. It felt like karma. 2 weeks later, she texted me about getting drinks to discuss that charity event. I told myself it was innocent and just networking, but we both knew what was happening. One drink turned into several. Several drinks turned into her place. Her place turned into a regular thing. The affair went on for months. Richard remained completely oblivious, or so I thought. At work, he continued to be the same condescending jerk, piling on impossible deadlines, taking credit for my ideas in meetings. And every time he announced he'd be working late, I'd be in his house, in his bed, with his wife. I won't lie, there was a certain thrill to it, a sense of justice even. He didn't appreciate what he had, not his wife, not his employees. I was just taking what he didn't value, right? Wrong. So very, very wrong. The first hint that something wasn't right came about 4 months in. I was at Emily's place when she got a call from Richard saying he was coming home early. The panic in her eyes seemed genuine as she rushed me out the back door. But later, thinking back on it, there was something off about the timing, like it had been planned. Then I noticed Richard's behavior at work changing subtly. He started including me in more executive meetings, introducing me to board members. The promotion I'd been chasing seemed suddenly within reach. He even mentioned that the company needed loyal people in leadership positions, with a strange emphasis on the word loyal while maintaining direct eye contact. It was around this time that I ran into a former colleague, James, who had left the company about 2 years earlier. He'd been on a similar upward trajectory, until suddenly he wasn't. The official story was that he'd pursued other opportunities, but the rumor mill suggested he'd been quietly pushed out. Over drinks, James was evasive about why he'd left. But after a few whiskeys, he asked me out of nowhere, "How well do you know Richard's wife?" My blood ran cold. I played dumb, of course, but James just gave me this look of pity and said, "Just be careful, man. That's all I'm saying." That conversation sent me down a rabbit hole. I started looking into other promising executives who had mysteriously left the company over the years. There was a pattern. They'd get close to a major promotion, then suddenly they'd be gone. No dramatic firing, just quiet departures followed by corporate silence. I began to dig deeper, reaching out to some of these former employees under the pretense of networking. Most wouldn't talk. But one guy, 3 drinks in at a bar far from the office, finally opened up. "You're sleeping with Emily, aren't you?" he asked bluntly. When I didn't immediately deny it, he just nodded. "Thought so. Let me guess. Company party, Richard ignoring her, she gave you her number for some bullshit reason." It was like he was reading from a script of my life. He went on to explain that the same thing had happened to him, and to at least 3 others he knew of. Richard and Emily had an arrangement. She would seduce up-and-coming executives who were getting too close to Richard's level. If they took the bait, it proved they couldn't be trusted. "It's the perfect loyalty test," he explained. "If you're willing to sleep with the boss's wife, what else would you do? Steal clients? Leak information to competitors? Take his job the first chance you get?" Those who failed the test were never explicitly fired for the affair. That would create too much scandal, too much liability. Instead, they'd be sidelined, excluded from important meetings, passed over for key projects, until they got the message and left voluntarily. I felt sick, used, but also determined not to become another casualty of this twisted game. After that revelation, I started seeing everything differently. All those company events where executives' wives were present took on a sinister new meaning. The way certain senior leaders would encourage their wives to get to know promising young directors. The pointed comments about family values and loyalty during promotion discussions. But I needed more than just one bitter ex-employee's word. I needed proof that this wasn't just happening to me, that it wasn't just Richard's personal perversion. So I did what any good corporate strategist would do. I gathered intelligence. I created an anonymous email account and reached out to former employees from other departments who had left under similar circumstances. I joined industry forums and private LinkedIn groups, dropping subtle hints about executive loyalty tests to see who would respond. I even hired a private investigator, expensive but worth it, to look into Richard's past at his previous companies. What I uncovered was both shocking and, in a twisted way, impressive in its systematic execution. This wasn't just Richard's game. This was happening across companies, across industries. The details varied, but the core strategy was the same. Use spouses, usually wives but occasionally husbands in more progressive companies, to test the loyalty of rising stars. Those who passed, by refusing the advances, were welcomed into the executive ranks. Those who failed were quietly sidelined or pushed out. The private investigator found that Richard had worked at 3 companies before ours. At each one, promising executives had mysteriously derailed their careers just before making the jump to the C-suite. And at each company, Richard and Emily had been present at key social functions. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. This isn't just about individual bosses protecting their turf. This is about maintaining the power structure of corporate America itself. Think about it. What better way to ensure that only the right kind of people make it to the top? The kind who can be trusted to maintain the status quo, who won't rock the boat or challenge the established order. It's a filtering system disguised as a moral test, and it's been happening for decades. One retired executive, speaking on condition of absolute anonymity, told me that similar tactics were used back at the 80s and 90s. "We just didn't have a name for it then," he said. "It was just understood that certain lines couldn't be crossed if you wanted to make it to the top." The more I dug, the more I realized this wasn't just about sex or fidelity. It was about control, about making sure that the only people who reached the highest levels of power were those who could be controlled, either because they'd passed the test and proven their moral fiber, or because they'd failed and could be blackmailed or threatened with exposure if they ever stepped out of line. I found evidence of this practice in finance, tech, law, even academia. Anywhere there's a significant power structure to maintain, this test seems to emerge organically, or perhaps it's deliberately spread from one executive to another. a secret handshake of sorts for those who want to protect their positions. So what did I do with this information? What would you do if you find yourself being tested? If you have no idea, then just do what I did. First, I stopped seeing Emily immediately. I made up an excuse about work pressure and ethical concerns. She seemed disappointed but not surprised. Looking back, I wonder how many times she's played this role, how many careers she's helped derail. Then I started building my case, carefully, methodically, without leaving fingerprints. I created a dossier of evidence, dates and times of meetings with Emily that coincided with Richard's late nights at the office, proving he knew exactly what was happening. Patterns of promotions and departures that correlated with these tests. Testimonials from former employees who'd experienced the same thing. I didn't confront Richard directly. That would have been career suicide. Instead, I anonymously shared my findings with HR and the company's ethics committee, making sure to exclude any evidence of my own involvement with Emily. I also sent copies to several board members known for their stance on corporate governance. The key was presenting it as a systemic issue, not a personal vendetta. I framed it as a liability concern. What would happen if this practice came to light in the current Me Too era? What would it do to the company's reputation, its stock price, its ability to recruit top talent? Within weeks, there was a quiet but significant restructuring. Richard was offered an early retirement package he couldn't refuse. Several other executives were reassigned to less influential positions. The board announced a comprehensive review of promotion practices and ethics policies. As for me, I didn't get that executive promotion, at least not right away. But I wasn't pushed out either. I maintained a low profile, done my work, and bided my time. The new leadership seems more focused on merit than these archaic loyalty tests. We'll see. So what's the lesson here for you ambitious young executives on the rise? How do you navigate this invisible barrier? First, be aware. If you're getting close to a major promotion and suddenly find yourself being pursued by someone connected to your superiors, especially a spouse, proceed with extreme caution. No matter how genuine it seems, no matter how flattering, consider the possibility that you're being tested. Second, network laterally. Talk to others at your level across departments, across companies even. Share information, carefully, about promotion patterns and corporate culture. If certain promising executives keep disappearing just before making the jump to the next level, that's a red flag. Third, document everything. If you do find yourself in a situation like mine, keep records, dates, times, witnesses, patterns, not to blackmail anyone, but to protect yourself and potentially others. Fourth, consider whether you really want to be part of a system that operates this way. Is that corner office worth it if the price of admission is either absolute subservience to the old guard or complicity in their games? There are companies out there with more transparent, merit-based promotion practices. They might be worth seeking out. Finally, if you do make it to the top, break the cycle. Don't perpetuate these tests. Create a culture of transparency and genuine meritocracy. The old ways persist because each new generation of leaders, having survived the gauntlet themselves, sees no reason to change it. As for Emily and Richard, last I heard, they're still together, still attending company functions as the perfect power couple. I sometimes wonder if she ever feels remorse for her role in this scheme, if she ever thinks about the careers and lives she's helped derail. But then I remember the calculated look in her eyes that last time we met, and I doubt it. The game continues. The tests go on. But now you know. And knowing is half the battle. Thanks for listening to one very short story. If today's story hooked you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us grow and keeps the suspense coming your way. Want to dive deeper? Check out the podcast description to learn more about the show and explore special offers from our sponsor. Until next time, keep dodging bullets and stay safe in the shadows.